You read them at stltoday.com. You read them if you get your newspaper on your front stoop still, and you hear them every Tuesday and Thursday with us on the Big 550 KTRS. Good morning, Tony Messenger.
Didn't John Capoletti play 1 year in junior college for the High Point Drive-In?
I don't know. He did not play for the High Point Drive-Ins. He played safety.
Morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
He played safety for Penn State, and then they switched him to running back, but that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, that was a good move.
All right, Tony, you have a couple of good columns, but I can't get enough of Eric Greitens' news. So let me ask you this question. There were a couple of motions that the judge ruled on yesterday. Anything surprising coming out of yesterday's rulings by the judge?
Well, a little bit. I mean, it's in a high-powered case like this, it's a little bit surprising when Greitens' attorneys go 0 for 3, and that's what happened yesterday. Probably the most significant and potentially surprising ruling was that the judge ruled that this case will be heard by a jury. A lot of people, myself included, when the case came about, thought that was just generally as a matter of course, if somebody asked for a bench trial, something that they get. But in fact, it's not. I was doing a little bit of work on it yesterday. Dylan Roof, the young man who bombed the church in South Carolina, had asked for a bench trial and got a jury. It's happened in a few high-profile cases. And, the argument is solid. Trial by jury is something that's been guaranteed in our Constitution for a very long time. And the judge decided that Governor Greitens is going to have to face a jury of his peers. So that's interesting. And if you look at it from a political lens, really bad for the governor. The governor carried 16% of the vote in the city of St. Louis. So if you look at it in a political lens, separate from, whether or not he committed the crime, he's going to have a more than likely a majority of jury members who are predisposed to not thinking that much of the governor, period.
No,
so,
I agree with that. But I mean, just because you might have voted against the man doesn't mean you can't sit in judgment of him and say, you know what, I didn't vote for the guy, but there's not enough evidence here. Yeah.
I agree. I think to try to make an argument that you bring a jury from somewhere else because of politics would be ridiculous. But everything that is the atmosphere that this trial is going to be in is going to be very politically charged, and in part because the governor is trying to make it politically charged. This is a governor who called the prosecutor reckless and liberal and whatever. Well, the prosecutor kicked his attorney's butts yesterday.
Right.
Three rulings. The judge will not hear the case. The jury will, in terms of ultimately deciding. Also, the motion to dismiss that had been filed and amended by the governor's attorney, Stout Bennett, was also overturned. So that means the trial is going forward. It will take place in May. And the defense's attempt to get rid of Harvard law professor Ron Sullivan from the prosecution team also failed. So not a good day in court for Governor Greitens and his legal team.
What do you make of the motion that he didn't rule on, which is cameras in the courtroom? I know the Post-Dispatch, as well as other media outlets, are sort of teaming up to sort of have a voice to say that cameras need to be in the courtroom. Because, as I tweeted out earlier today, if they don't allow cameras in the courtroom, that means they're all allowed privacy in the courtroom, while the Governor Greitens attorneys argue that you don't have privacy in the bedroom.
Yeah, it's a difficult decision, and it's a decision that, take this case out of it. Lots of court cases are decided without cameras in the courtroom. As a member of the press, I am always in favor of openness on everything. I want open meetings. I want open records. I want the courts to be open. I think the courts have increasingly fallen prey to some of the same things that are going on in executive and legislative branches, where the judges just assume, well, nobody's paying attention. We can have this hearing in chambers. We can do this privately. We don't have to post that document. I think we as a nation are getting further and further away from those constitutional protections that exist to make sure that our government bodies are accountable. And so, I would be in favor of cameras in the courtroom. I think looking historically in Missouri, judges have not always looked amenably on cameras in the courtroom. So I wouldn't say that it's likely that it's going to happen. Obviously, this is a very high-profile case, and anything that can be done to make sure that it's decided in the light of day is generally, I think, good for the cause of justice. So I hope the judge rules in favor of cameras in the courtroom.
Where does Greitens' team, have they said one way or the other, and what has the prosecution said one way or the other about cameras and media in there and everything else?
Greitens' team has not said publicly, as far as I can tell, what their position is. The prosecution has opposed cameras in the courtroom. And I don't think that's all that unusual. Most government bodies that I'm used to dealing with in the courts tend to instinctively oppose cameras in the courtroom.
Yeah.
I hope the judge ultimately allows it. I have covered trials that had cameras, and there is a way to do it to shield witnesses. There is a way to do it to shield jurors, and there are plenty of professional media members who are used to being in a pool situation in which, there's one still cameraman and one TV cameraman, and everybody shares the footage. So I think there's a way to do it. I think the cause of justice probably calls for it. We'll find out if this thing goes forward in May.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think happened yesterday, even though I think it's still unlikely to happen, is the judge increased at least the odds that the governor at some point pleads down to a misdemeanor. Losing all three rulings yesterday does not bode well for the governor, and it at least gives the prosecution, Kim Gardner and her team, some momentum. So I still don't see this governor particularly taking a plea, but it's not looking good, and I can imagine at some point his attorney saying, hey, guilty to a misdemeanor here is a lot better than taking our chances with a felony with a jury.
Well, I think that depends on what happens in these hearings, on the hearings to impeach down in Jefferson City, because we're going to know more about that before this trial starts in the city.
We are, and everything that I've heard and seen in that direction points to a likelihood that a report comes out that is not very positive towards the governor. Whether or not it asks for or requests or leads to impeachment, too early to say. But that report, in some capacity, I can't imagine is going to be very helpful to the governor.
Right, because that report can be salacious, it can be embarrassing. That doesn't have the same rules of evidence as, say, the city trial has, right? So all of the things you can't necessarily, that are illegal, maybe unethical, maybe sordid details, that'll come out in that report. Whereas
I would assume that those details are going to come out in that report. It's a little tough to tell because the House committee that is investigating has done most of their work in secret, and so I don't know what's going to be in that report. But based on press reports so far, in terms of who they've interviewed and a lot of the same people apparently, and maybe even more that went before the grand jury, we know now that investigative committee, as well as the attorney general, as well as the prosecutor, is also looking into, mission continues. So, there's other stuff possibly coming here, totally separate from this trial, and that magnifies the bad day that the governor's legal team had yesterday.
Tony Messenger, never a dull moment. Tuesdays and Thursdays with us, stltoday.com. Tony, thanks.